hyper individualism is one of the things that I feel as though is detrimental to the Black community. So it's basically when people, there's a hyper focused perspective on people as individuals, as opposed to being interdependent or being collective by nature.
Welcome back to the podcast. I started this podcast as a way to help Black men in all aspects of our lives. Studies show on average we lose 2.8 years of our life when we're under heavy stress. And I think we can gain those 2.8 years back if we express ourselves healthily. Stick with me as I interview therapists, doctors, advocates, activists, and friends about how we can be better as Black men and as a Black community. If you're not subscribed to us on YouTube and following us on Instagram and TikTok, you'll definitely want to do that. Without further ado, let's get into the episode. All right, y'all, we're here with Dr. Chanda. Dr. Chanda, can you please tell the people a little bit about what you do, minds of the culture, all that good stuff, because you have a lot of dope stuff that you do. So I just want people to know.
First of all, thank you so much for having me. I think what you're doing is amazing. I think it's definitely needed in our community. And again, like I had to show love to the podcast because like we're killing it out here. But for those of you who are listening, my name is Dr. Chanda. I am a licensed clinical psychologist. I have a nonprofit called Minds of the Culture, which focuses specifically on treating Black families and helping individuals of African descent to receive treatment. You guys can download our app in the App Store. Also, I have a private practice, which recently launched. So I'm super excited and been super busy with that. And I'm just out here doing me, creating content, helping the people heal. That's it.
Absolutely. I love that. So please, can you tell me what is hyper individuality, right? Because I've been seeing that in our community a lot. And I know what I think it is. I definitely saw a clip that I feel like went viral last week with a woman talking about she would die before she calls her baby daddy. And I felt like that was part of a little bit of hyper individualism. So can you tell me a little bit about like hyper individuality and like what that actually is to you?
Who said that though?
It was some woman on a podcast. And I just recently put up a YouTube video about it, but it wasn't like a famous celebrity or anything like that. It was just kind of like one of those podcasts that you see, one of those clips that go viral. Yeah.
Wow. That really breaks my heart just hearing that without even knowing their situation for real. But hyper individualism is one of the things that I feel as though is detrimental to the Black community. So it's basically when people, there's a hyper focused perspective on people as individuals, as opposed to being interdependent or being collective by nature. And so and I think the perfect example that I kind of like saw when I was just kind of doing some research on it is the COVID-19, right? So COVID-19 in 2020, that was a virus that a lot of people across the world was experiencing, but America, we had like soaring cases. Even though we have access to top medicines, we have access to so many different medical individuals and providers who can help us, we had soaring cases. And people attributed that to hyper individualism. So not necessarily considering the needs of other people, but saying I'm in my own right to be able to do the things that I want to do as long as it benefits me. And not necessarily considering how it impacts other people. Now, for Black people specifically, I think that this honestly goes against our norm. This goes against our nature. It's not African-centered to allow ourselves to be engulfed in this perspective of hyper-individualism.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, because now you segue into a very interesting conversation about African culture and just Black culture in general, right? And when I think about it, I always think about Black culture being like village mentality related, right? And like us trying to make sure that we are connected, that everybody knows everybody, that everybody's treated like family. So hyper individualism, like you said, kind of goes against that. So where do you feel like that comes from though? Because I feel like in the Black community, like we have a lot of that.
Yeah. So I feel as though it's something that's definitely learned, right? And we learn it through our nation, capitalism, colonization, like these ideas that are very Eurocentric based, these very Eurocentric perspectives where people are more so that westernized idea of being individuals and just focusing on self and, working to make money as opposed to working to benefit community. Like that's honestly where we get a lot of that from. And we see a lot of that hyper individualism, especially amongst people who align more with those types of values, right? Those westernized values. I'm not here to call anybody out, but
no, yeah, go ahead. You good?
I'm a firm believer that Black excellence we can experience that in various domains of our lives. And I was talking to my friend Phil about this, but people, especially Black people who are in that, you know, the Black wealth type of community, right? So I'm a believer that I'm going to touch $1 million in this lifetime. I know
love
that.
it. Yes.
Yeah, but at the same time, when we align with that very American individualistic perspective, it's like we're constantly just working toward that quote unquote American dream, not necessarily wondering how we can benefit community, not even checking in on family and understanding how we can contribute to family, but it's more so about us and what we have to do in order to get to that perspective. And I honestly, I only brought that up. I only brought up the Black wealth community because, you know, that's often what I see on the gram and like other social media avenues where that mentality of hyper individualism is really pertinent. So they're probably gonna cancel you for that though.
No. You're not getting canceled. Hell no. Definitely not for that, because it leads me to thinking about like this, like, so we were supposed to originally do the episode on hustle culture, right? And then when I was really thinking about hustle culture, I was like, where does that come from? And then that's when I was like, okay, hyper individualism is part of like, I think it creates this like hustle culture that we see in our community. I feel like you just spoke to that a little bit, right? Because that's what we see, not even necessarily like in the Black wealth community, of course, but just in general, like there's this thought process in the Black community that in order for us to be successful, we have to really grind and get it out the mud. We have to do it on our own. And it's not really worth anything unless we're doing it on our own. And we had to really struggle for it, right? Exactly. And so I don't necessarily agree with that. I feel like there are ways to make money that can involve community, and that should involve community, and that should also feed back into community, right? So I'm not in the business of grinding myself to a pulp in order for me to make $1 million, $1 billion, however much money, and then also not feeding that money back into the community. I think that's detrimental not only to me, but to the people around me, right? And so like, I love the fact that you mentioned that, because it's a big, I think, misconception in our community that that's the way that we should go about creating like wealth, is just by grinding ourselves to a pulp, doing it on our own. And then as soon eventually we'll meet, like we'll reach the top of the mountain and we'll feel good about ourselves. And like, is that really the route that you want to take?
Exactly. But then you got, I'm not going to, listen, I had, the names was on the tip of my tongue. You know, I'm not going to say the specific influencers' names, but you got people like this who are prominent figures in the Black community who kind of perpetuate this idea of, you know, this individualistic perspective of wealth and what it looks like in Black communities. And, you know, I got here by, you know, pulling up my bootstraps and working. Y'all need to do it too, blah, blah, blah. It's so annoying. But, you know, I think we just really have to hold those types of people accountable. Yeah, so
nah, you know what's, you know,
in trouble on this podcast.
No. The point is not to get you in trouble. We're having a candid conversation, right? I didn't even know it was gonna go in this direction, but I'm glad it is, because it's allowing me to, you know, express yourself, Black man. It's allowing me to express myself about these different things. I find some of these figures, like, here's the thing, right? We have to be able to use discernment when it comes to these figures in our community, right? So yes, it is about holding them accountable, but it's also about understanding that what works for them may not work for me, right? So like, I'm a name drop because I don't really give a damn. So I see a lot of Steve Harvey motivation, right? Okay. And Steve Harvey will always be at the end of his Steve Harvey show, and he'll give a lot of motivation. He'll tell people like, yo, you know, you really just got to do it, and you just have to keep on going and keep going. And like just a general like tips and motivation that you get right from someone that's at that level. And some of it is good, but some of it I'm like, yo, I'm just not gonna, I don't agree with this. Like there was this one thing he was saying about like sleep. And he was like, you can't be sleeping because while you sleeping, somebody else is up working on their dream, right? And I remember I made a reel about that. Like he said, you was talking about sleep. And then at the end of that reel, I was in a do-rag. And I like, you know, I was just saying like me getting ready to get 7 to 9 hours of my recommended sleep, because I'm not about to be sitting here trying to work all this time and not get enough sleep, because that's not going to be conducive. That's not healthy for me. It may be healthy and it may have worked for Steve Harvey and it may work for other people, but I know what works for me. Right. And so that's what I'm saying when it comes to discernment is like, yes, hold them accountable to do better and be more informed. But also we got to hold ourselves accountable in a sense to also have a certain level of discernment when it comes to how we choose to live our lives, because I listen to a lot of people that are motivational, but there's a lot of their messages that I'm just like, I don't know, you know what I'm saying? I don't know. I don't really know if I align with this, but it's cool. It's cool. It may help somebody else, but just for me in a phase of my life that I'm at, nah. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So let's segue a little bit, right? Because I don't want to get you in trouble.
No, we good. I don't care.
Okay. Okay, cool. All right. So do you feel like this mindset, like hyper individualism this hyper individualist mindset can lead to mental health issues in our community?
Oh, for sure. So like when thinking about, I think we saw examples of this, especially recently as more people are coming out about like suicidal ideations and things of that nature. And beyond that, like, if we're looking at the research here, we're looking at like, especially Black people and Black men, namely, and also Black adolescents. These are groups of people who are experiencing even more like suicidal ideations, right? And so when people are taking on that individualistic perspective and not relying on community I'm not even going to say relying on community because some might not feel comfortable being able to rely on community, right? Because with this internalization of individualism, they might feel as though they don't have safe spaces, like they don't have a place to be able to talk about some of their experiences that they're having in life. And so because of that mentality of not being able to, or feeling like I can rely on my brother or my sister or what have you, I might start to internalize. Right. And so we know internalization doesn't do anything but either keep the situation steady or to continue to intensify it. And so when people are experiencing mental health concerns, especially us in the Black community, because being Black in America is traumatic in itself, and we're internalizing that because of individuality and individualism, or hyper individualism for that matter, and we're not really taking care of that, of course it's going to be detrimental to us and our community.
Right. And you spoke a little bit about like Black males or Black men and like our suicides and just also Black adolescents. And I think that's part of the reason why, like in 2017, I always talk about how I had suicidal ideations in 2017. Like I didn't want to be here. And I always remember that time I was really at a point where it wasn't even really hyper individualism, but I was at a point where I was like, yo, I just can't keep doing this. And I didn't feel like I had a space where, not necessarily that I didn't feel like I had a space where I was heard, because I knew I was being heard, but I didn't have a space where I felt like I was getting the help that I needed. Right. And so I feel like that speaks to what you were talking about, how like sometimes a lot of people that are dealing with these issues and that may be seen as like having a hyper individualist mindset don't have those spaces to be able to really deal with some of the things that they're experiencing. So I guess, I don't know, what do you feel like would be helpful for these people? Like, I know, like I would say I have a platform that's helping. But what are some other ways that someone that may be listening right now can help someone that may not be as comfortable when it comes to like reaching out for help because they feel like there isn't going to be help in their community? Well, how can, because I get that question a lot in my DMs. How can I help this person? Right. And I'm like, like I give my tips, right? And I can give some, but I want to know what do you think?
Yeah. So that goes back to the conversation of like safe spaces. And I always say, like, especially with people who are experiencing debilitating symptoms like suicidal ideation and depressive symptoms and what have you. And these people like, okay, what is it that you need from me right now? Because friends and family might not come to you and say, I need X, Y, or Z. They might not feel comfortable enough to express to you about some of the things that they're internalizing or suppressing. But if we come to them, we're letting them know that, I'm a safe space. I can, assist you in whatever way that you need support. And also for that individual who's having a hard time opening up because of things like hyper individualism, I would encourage us, especially if they're Black, to kind of go back to our roots, right? So as I alluded to earlier, like African people, people of African descent, we are collectivistic by nature. We were never intended to survive alone. We were never intended to survive as individuals. We are intended to rely on our village. And if we are truly going to be people of African descent and we, claiming, Black excellence and, Black girl magic and all the other cliches that we tend to utilize nowadays in our communities, I think we have to really embody African-based living and perspectives, which is to rely on the village, to rely on the community.
I love that. I love that. So, okay, now you got me thinking. So how are some ways that someone that has a family, like let's say someone has, someone starting their own family traditions, maybe they just had a newborn, right? And they have their partner and they're trying to figure out like family traditions. What are some ways that they can implement some traditions in their family that will be, I guess, African centric or African rooted and allow them to create some of this kind of like collectivism? Is that how you worded it?
Yeah. Being collective by nature. But, some of the things that we can start doing with our children is by, those racial socialization piece. Right. So plenty of research out there talks about how, especially in the Journal of Black Psychology, it talks about how when we help our kids to experience racial socialization at younger ages, they'll be more resilient to things like, racial trauma, racism, and, other mental health related concerns and things of that nature. And what I mean by racial socialization is basically introducing them to African-based art, African parades, like, just getting them more introduced to some of our things that are relevant in our culture and helping them to kind of socialize in that aspect.
What's so interesting? My dad is Ghanaian, right?
Oh, really?
Yeah. My dad is Ghanaian. My actual name is Kofi. And so Kofi means born on Friday in Ghana. It's in the Ashanti region. That's what it means. And I'm thinking about growing up when I was really young, like maybe like eight to like probably even earlier than that. I used to go with my dad to the flea market. And he had this business where he would sell African like artifacts and he would get them from Ghana. Like he would actually get them sourced from Ghana. They would be like somebody would make some artifact out of one piece of wood. And like, it's like all these different carvings and curves. And then you would like really sitting there thinking like, how the hell did somebody make this out of one piece of wood? Right. And so he would sell this he would sell this at the flea market and I would help him. So I got used to at a young age, like waking up at like 6 a.m., going with my dad to the flea market on like Sunday and like selling African artifacts with him, paintings, African movies and all these different things. So I feel like when you talk about like that racial socialization, because I was going to ask you, what is that? Right. And then you explained that. I was like, whoa, okay, I did that at an early age because I came in an African, I was born, like I had my dad is African, right? So I was born in that kind of like environment where I was seeing that growing up all the time. So like, I don't know, like I've experienced a lot of racism in my, in my life and, systemic racism, all these different things, just like any other Black person, but it's never been something that I feel like has been like something that made me feel like I'm a victim of my circumstance. I'm just like, okay, this is what's going on. This is not going to stop me from doing what it is that I need to do. And I feel like a lot of times I see that in our community where we feel like we can't do things because we're Black. You know what I'm saying? Do you see that sometimes too or no?
No, absolutely. Yeah, it's a sense of like feeling hopeless about certain situations, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I was going, okay. So you talked about racial socialization, right? And so, okay, so that would be like what you said was like basically somebody having like experiences with like the African culture at early ages in their family.
Yeah. African and African American, just things of African descent, like introducing them.
Is there anything else that you can think of outside of that racial socialization? And you don't have to.
No, but I can look up. So I got the Journals of Black Psychology. Right.
Okay. So the resource is the Journal of Black Psychology.
Yes.
Okay. Because you mentioned that, I was like, dang, she's reading the Journal of Black Psychology. Maybe I should read that too. Okay. Yeah. Well, go ahead.
Yeah, just subscribe to it. So all you got to subscribe to it, and it's a list of like different researches and articles that Black psychologists put out based on their research. Articles and stuff. So yeah.
Okay. And I was gonna ask you, because we talked a little bit about like Black people feeling like they can't accomplish things due to them being Black. Yeah. Where would you say that's a like victim mentality? Because I hear a lot about victim mentality and like abundance mindset and all that kind of stuff. Where do you feel like that falls?
Well,
because I know it's kind of complex to answer, especially since we deal with racism in our community, right? Like, or just in general in America. So maybe it's not a victim mentality and it's also circumstance. So I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
So when I think of that, I think less about like the victim mentality. I'm sure people like label it as that, but I think more about Dr. Joy's work, Dr. DeGroy. She coined the term post-traumatic slave syndrome.
Yeah, I remember that. I know. Yeah, please come on, educate people. Yes,
I
come on.
got you.
Yeah.
I got you. Yeah. So in her findings, so she basically postulated that when a group of people they experience ancestral trauma, such as i.e. slavery, and that same group of people continues to experience similar trauma, such as like racism and discrimination, especially like Black people in America, like we've been experiencing this for centuries, those people will develop or could develop what we call post-traumatic slave syndrome, which can impact people in several domains, right? So it can impact our cognitions and how we think about ourselves. So feeling as though, our lives are hopeless, feeling as though like you said, I can't achieve certain things because of the color of my skin. It can impact us emotionally, such as, increased anger and irritability, especially about some of our circumstances. It can increase our hypervigilance, like feeling on edge, especially when we feel like our lives are threatened. So yeah, that's why I really enjoy her work, because she really kind of puts into perspective how this is manifested.
Yeah, you just said something that really made me think about. You said what was like the second to last one? You talked about, I think, irritability or like hyper arousal in terms of like anxiety and like
hypervigilance.
Yes, hypervigilance. Okay. This is
Mm-hmm.
something that I talk about on a platform a lot, especially with Black men.
Yeah.
We are very like hyper aroused, hypervigilant.
Mm-hmm.
At least for me, right? Like I'll speak for myself, right? I'm very hyper vigilant when I'm out, because in the back of my mind, like subconsciously, I'm like, yo, I could die. Like that's really what I'd be thinking, right? And I noticed part of it is like social anxiety, part of it is like my own experiences with trauma and having like been robbed multiple times before, you know what I'm saying? Growing up in an environment where you can't really not be hyper vigilant because things can happen and have happened, right? And so what I tell Black men all the time is like, knowing that has been my experience, I'm like, yo, y'all have to learn how to deal with, like, or not even y'all, we have to learn how to deal with that anxiety, because part of it is also anxiety. And so like one thing that I've been doing that has been really, 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 really helpful, and I wanted to ask you is like what you think could be helpful for like dealing with post-traumatic slave syndrome. But one thing I've been doing to deal with that like hypervigilance is meditation. So like belly breathing. And I've been talking about meditation a lot on the platform in like the last week. Yeah, because I recently got back into meditating. So I was talking to my therapist about it, and she's like, yeah, you should meditate. And I was like, all right, cool, I'm gonna try it. And so I tried it for a little bit, and then I stopped. But when I was trying it, things were going better for myself. And then I got busy and I stopped, and I realized like how much of a like, I guess like a downturn my life took. And then I started doing it again. I feel like things have kind of like, my body has responded in a really good way. And like anytime I get like super, super anxious about stuff, I'll do some meditation. I'll meditate for like 5 minutes. So that's one thing that I wanted to talk about. And I wanted to ask you, what do you think are some good ways that we, not even necessarily just Black men, but we can kind of deal with that post-traumatic slave syndrome? Because I feel like it's something that you said, it affects all, I think it affects all Black people, regardless of if you had slave ancestors or not, because we all have experienced it in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, so like on a very surface level, so one of the things that you brought out is that like we could be experiencing those symptoms associated with it from a physical angle. So like you said, deep breathing is definitely one of those strategies that can help us. Even kind of like looking at things from a perspective of, yes, I'm going to feel angry about it, but also my anger is valid, right? A lot of times, like, we have to dismiss our anger. We have to suppress it. It's not okay for me to be angry. Like, I think we all experience, especially Black people, we experience like a collective anger in the summer of 2020, right? When we saw so many of our brothers and sisters gunned down. Not that that's the only time that that's happening, but that was probably the first time we saw so many cases globally talked about. And so like kind of validating our own anger can be helpful and therapeutic for us in itself. And also relying on community. So when we rely on community, it's going back to collectivism and, relying on our village. That helps us to feel supported. It helps us to feel like we have safe spaces to be able to talk about some of the things that we're experiencing. And that in itself can be therapeutic as well.
Absolutely, man. I love it. I love it. So please, I wanted you to get some time to talk about Minds of the Culture and what you're doing. You kind of briefly talked about it. But please, I didn't know y'all had an app. So tell me what the app, like what's in the app, what it does, all that kind of good stuff, what you guys have coming up, what you're working on, all that stuff, please. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So Minds of the Culture is the nonprofit, right? So this is basically the platform that we utilize in order to one, help to educate Black people in the Black community about some of the things that we experience as a culture, and two, to also help to fund therapy, which is actually still in the works to help Black people, find therapists and also to have their sessions covered. I'm finding that as I'm entering into the private practice space, like it's just really hard. Well, of course, I knew this prior to, but like actually witnessing it and working with people who experience this. But for us, it's like really hard to have the resources to be able to go to multiple sessions. And I get it. So that's why Minds of the Culture is so near and dear to my heart. So I always had a passion for Black people, Black psychology, as well as like focusing on the aspect of faith and how we can utilize our faith as Black people in order to help cope with mental health. And so I decided to make this a movement. So I'm appreciative of you even talking about it. And yes, we do have an app. So if you go to the App Store and on Google Play, you can download the Minds of the Culture app. And there you can find various coping strategies. You can find inspirational messages, various videos. I have a video on there that talks about post-traumatic slave syndrome specifically. Yeah, so many things you can find on there. And shout out to Chanda. She really helps with, focusing on some of the content that we put out. So
Chanda is dope, man. Chanda is dope for sure. Okay, so last thing, because you gave me another question when you was talking about what you do with Minds of the Culture. So you talked about faith, right? And faith being used as a tool to help with healing. What does that look like to you? What does that actually mean for you? Because I talk about my faith a lot on the page. When I sometimes get comments from certain people and they're like, man, can you stop shoving God down our throats? I'm like, listen, bro, I don't know what to tell you. God has helped me a lot, right? So the platform is for me to express myself and tell y'all the things that have helped me to heal. And if y'all don't want to hear that, then that's fine. But I'm not gonna stop giving God all the glory. So you tell me what it means, seriously, you tell me what it means for you when you say like using your faith to kind of help you heal or help others heal.
Yeah. So, disclosure, like I literally grew up in church and beyond, because I feel like people can grow up in church, but not grow up in God. So, but I personally had experiences with God. And so, I can honestly say that like the reasons I prayed and got through certain situations, the reasons why I was able to navigate situations in life was because I had a prayer life. And I was able to hear the voice of God, and God was able to guide me through certain situations. And so because this is happening, and here's the thing that I learned, especially in grad school, I think it's become more common now because more people are talking about it, but when you go to a doctor, when you go to a therapist or a psychologist, a Black person, they say, oh, I see angels, or I'm hearing from God, or I'm hearing, the voice of the Lord saying X, Y, and Z. They can diagnose you with psychosis, right? This person is hearing and seeing things that other people aren't. I think now we're becoming, I'm gonna say this lightly, I think people are becoming more culturally competent in that regard. But there was definitely a time where people were, especially Black people, were misdiagnosed because of the faith that they had. But my goal is to continue to bridge this gap between the mental health community and the faith communities, because I think there's been this idea of mistrust, right? So professionals, they're again constantly diagnosing people with these, psychosis, or not taking their full perspective into consideration when understanding the treatment plan and things of that nature. But also, like the Black church, I feel as though there's been mistrust in the mental health and provider community because, like I said, we've been misdiagnosed. And also, there aren't many therapists out there, psychologists out there who can really advocate for the needs of their clients who do experience faith-related cultural perspectives and who want to incorporate that into the treatment plan. And because of that, that's become my passion, and I really hope to bridge the gap between it. I feel like I said a mouthful, but
no, you said more than enough, and I definitely understand what you're talking about. One thing that I wanted to piggyback on is I know a lot of people that like always talk about having visions and talk about seeing things and things actually that they see and dream coming true and like all these different things. So I can just imagine how that would be a barrier for them going into therapy and talking to their therapist about this and then getting diagnosed with psychosis. Like, nah, bro, I've been this way since I was born. Like, I'm not crazy. Like, this is actually real. You know what I'm saying? So, and that goes back to our culture too. I was talking to somebody, Ade, he does like a lot of work with like African spirituality and like connecting people with their ancestors and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of that work can be seen as like psychosis, but when you're African, and you're rooted in that Africanness, you understand like where he's coming from. You understand that spirituality. So we were having this conversation, and I know if he was having that conversation with somebody else, they'd be like, really, bro, are you serious? Like, that's actually what's happening. But I'm talking to him, and like, I know what he's saying is real because my dad downstairs, I've had experiences with my pops, and he's had experiences that he's told me about. And I'm like, I know my dad's not lying to me. Like, why would he lie to me about experiences with spirits and all these kind of things? Right. So like, I definitely think I think that work is very, very, very important, especially in the mental health community, because it's another barrier that we don't need in the Black community, getting people into therapy. So I applaud you for doing that work. So before we end, can you please tell the people where to find you, how they can learn more? I know you talked about the app, but where can people find you? How can people support all that good stuff?
Yeah. So they can follow the Minds of the Culture page. They can also follow my personal page. My website will be launching soon.
Hey.
In the works right now, but it will be launching soon. You can also email me at info@drchanda.org. I also have a podcast called Paging Dr. Chanda, where we talk about Black mental health, the culture, faith, and everything else under the sun. So
dope. Dr. Chanda, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you.
Yes. Are you kidding me? This was so fun.
Yeah, this has been a dope episode, man, for sure.
Yes. Thanks for having me.
Yo, I'm excited, man. We're currently building the exclusive community, and it's going to have so many dope features. We're partnering with a Black organization to offer low-cost therapy to each member of the exclusive community. And when I say low cost, I mean that members will be able to get therapy sessions for less than $50, regardless of who they are and where they are. We're also going to have free ebooks and courses, including both the Hurting to Healing ebook and the therapy ebook I'm currently writing, live podcast episodes where you'll be able to interact with the guest and I in real time, community forums, exclusive merch, and categorized content so you can easily find information that may be useful to you. So go to expressyourselfblackman.com/therapy and register for early access. It's literally a 30-second process. I just need your name, email, and social media handle to make sure you get access before anyone else. And before I dip, I just want to thank you for your support. Without people like you, none of this would be possible. I can't wait to see you when we launch.
Sometimes I know you feel like you ain't got nobody to speak to. Shoulder to lean on somebody you could preach to. No, you need to hear it, my brother, I love you. We got way too much to live for.